The market always came alive before the sun hit the bricks. That golden hour when the stones still remembered the coolness of night, and the scent of rising yeast and strong coffee traveled on the breath of Mantova. I was always the first to arrive. Not because I had to, but because I needed the quiet before the voices came. The greetings, the compliments, the children pressing their noses to the glass. I liked that part, truly, but only after I had a moment to remember who I was. Like the hundreds before it, I pressed open the shutter of my stall and was met with the faint screech of hinges, a sound I could time my heart to. Familiar, steady. The canopy above me swayed gently in the breeze, catching the early sunlight like a bell of linen. I unfolded my apron, tying it at the back with careful fingers, and reached for the wooden tray of cannoli I'd filled before dawn. I lined them in twos. Always twos order mattered to me. It was one of the few things that made the world feel safe. A little girl watched me from across the lane, clinging to her mother's skirt. Her eyes were wide, fixed not on the sweets but on my hands. Scarred, veiny, slow, but sure. When I caught her gaze, she smiled shyly. "She likes your bracelets," her mother said. I nodded, even though I wasn't wearing any. Just the gold band on my finger, worn thin from time and memory. I hadn't taken it off in 40 years, not even after the man it belonged to left this world. Or maybe it wasn't about the ring at all. Maybe the girl saw something else. Children do, sometimes. They see the whole of you, not just the part you present. "I'm Maria," I told her. "And these cannoli are filled with lemon cream today. Want to help me dust them with sugar?" The girl stepped forward. Her mother hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. I handed the girl a sieve filled with powdered sugar and guided her tiny hands as we moved it back and forth. The sugar fell like first snow. My Nona used to do that. Girl whispered. "Before she got sick," I smiled. "Not wide, but enough." "Then you're already better than most bakers. She taught you well." When they left, I returned to the counter. The tray was full now. 12 cannoli, perfectly lined. The smell of fried pastry and lemon zest floated around me. I wiped my hands, sat down on the small stool behind the stand, and reached for the radio. A familiar voice filled the air, Luciano Pavarotti, singing like his soul had no weight. I closed my eyes for a second. Only a second. That's when it started again. The remembering. You don't ask for memory to arrive. You don't light a candle or open a door. It comes uninvited, pressing itself into the gaps you try to fill with flour and sugar and laughter. This time it came gently, not with screams or locked doors. Just a voice. "Maria, you've got flour on your face," someone had said once. Long ago, and I had laughed. I was 8. My hands were covered in dough, my nose white as a ghost. My mother was peeling potatoes, and my brother Giuseppe had been humming to himself by the sink. That afternoon, the kitchen smelled of ragu and warm bread, and for a brief moment, I believed I belonged to something safe. But even then, I knew not to get too comfortable. The air in our home could change with the creak of a floorboard. Roberto Dash, my father, sat in his chair at the end of the table, the newspaper spread open in front of him like a curtain. He didn't like loudness. He didn't like crumbs. He didn't like anything, really, except his grappa and the horse races. Giuseppe had spilled water that night, and everything that was warm about the kitchen turned cold. It's strange what you remember. The way my mother flinched first, before he even stood. The way I reached for Giuseppe's hand, trying to pull him behind me. The way the glass rolled under the table, slow and mocking. I blinked and came back to the present. A customer was approaching. I wiped the corners of my eyes, then stood, smoothing my dress. Buongiorno, Maria, he said. You've outdone yourself today. These look like something from heaven. Only if heaven smells like lemon and burnt sugar, I replied. He laughed and bought 4. I wrapped them in parchment, folded the edges carefully. The bustle grew around me, voices rising, vendors calling out, espresso machines hissing like tiny engines of joy. And still my mind drifted. Not fully back, not fully here. I thought of that yellow house on Via della Speranza. Its shuttered windows. The way the floor creaked near the study door. The door I was never allowed to lock. The door that became a wall between who I was and who I had to become to survive. A breeze passed through the market, stirring the lace curtain I hung behind me. I turned slightly and saw my reflection in the polished pastry case. Pale skin, age spots like fallen petals, thin lips that used to know how to smile easily, a denim dress, soft from decades of wear, and that ring. Always that ring I touched. It gently, then turned back to my work. One more customer. One more sweet offering. You see, I've spent most of my life building things. Not buildings, not businesses, but moments. Tiny, sacred moments of safety. A sugar shell to protect the lemon cream inside. That's what the cannoli are, really. A secret, held together by care and timing and heat. Just like me. I was 8 when I learned how silence could have weight. That yellow house on Via della Speranza. Its name meant Hope Street, but it never lived up to it, was always quiet. Not in the peaceful way, like lullabies or Sunday afternoons. It was a different kind of silence. The kind that watches. The kind that presses on your chest and makes you second-guess every footstep. From the outside, our house looked normal. Modest but tidy. My mother kept the shutters clean, and the hydrangeas clipped neatly around the walkway. When people passed, they'd nod in approval. A respectable family, they'd say. Roberto works the docks. Elena makes a fine raggi, and the children such well-behaved little ones. Well-behaved was code. It meant quiet. It meant controlled. That day it must have been late spring. I remember the tablecloth fluttering from the open window and the faint trace of rosemary in the air. My mother was humming as she stirred a pot on the stove. Giuseppe sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a comic book, whispering the dialogue to himself like he wasn't allowed to speak out loud. And I was carefully laying the forks on the table. Tines up. Perfect spacing. Just as I'd been taught. Not like that, Maria, my mother said sharply. Start over. I looked at the table, confused. Everything seemed straight to me. Your father notices. You know that. I swallowed my protest and gathered the silverware, laying each piece again, slower this time. My hands trembled only slightly. I was getting better at hiding that dot we heard the key in the lock, and everything changed. My mother stopped humming. Giuseppe's comics slid under the couch. I pressed my hands flat against my skirt to keep them still. The door opened with a creak, and my father stepped in, shoulders broad and stained with the sweat of labor. He smelled of sea salt, tobacco, and the kind of liquor that lived in his coat lining that no one spoke. My mother handed him a towel without looking at him. He wiped his face, then tossed it toward the counter. Dinner ready? He asked, almost. She said, stirring faster. He didn't greet us. He never did. I think greetings require affection, and Roberto never gave what cost him effort. Instead, he slumped into his chair at the head of the table, the newspaper in his hand before the towel even hit the floor. I kept my eyes on the plates. My job wasn't to speak. It was to be invisible until I wasn't. I don't remember what Giuseppe had done. Maybe he bumped the table or sneezed too loudly. But the sound of the newspaper folding sharply, was enough to turn my stomach. My father stood. Slowly, deliberately. You boys don't sit still, he said. You grow up with worms in your spine. Giuseppe froze. I stepped between them without thinking, arms stretched just slightly. Maria, my mother snapped. Go stir the sauce. I didn't move. My heart pounded in my ears, but I kept my back straight. I don't think I was brave. I think I was afraid that if I left, my brother wouldn't be there when I came back. My father looked at me with an expression I didn't yet understand. Not just anger but calculation. That was the first time I felt it, though I wouldn't name it until much later. He didn't touch me then. Not in front of them. He just smirked, reached for a cigarette, and blew smoke toward the ceiling like the whole moment hadn't happened. That night he called me to the study. Even now, after all these years, I hesitate to name what began in that room. The air always smelled of paper, sweat, and cheap cologne. His desk was cluttered with racing slips, past due bills, and a photograph of my mother from when she was young. Sit, he said, pointing to the chair across from him. I obeyed. He poured himself a drink, downed it in one gulp, then stared at me with bloodshot eyes. You think you're better than your brother? He asked. No, Papa. You think you're smarter than your mother? No, Papa. You're pretty, like she used to be, before she forgot how to smile. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. That was the night I learned silence doesn't protect you. It only teaches them how much you can endure. Before breaking, when I finally escaped years later, I would tell people that it started small, that there wasn't one moment of terror, but a slow leak in the dam of my childhood. That's not true. There was a moment, a precise, carved-out second where I left my body and watched myself become something else. A doll. A possession. A payment for someone else's mistake. And all of it began in that study. In the yellow house on Via della Speranza. The market stall creaked again, pulling me back to the present. A woman was waiting patiently on the other side, holding a reusable bag and smiling kindly. I'll have 6 of the lemon ones, she said. My husband just got home from the hospital. These are his favorite. I nodded and began wrapping them, hands steady despite the ache in my bones. He's lucky, I said, offering the package. She smiled. I'm the lucky one. I watched her walk away, bag swinging, her steps light. And for a moment I envied her. Not for the husband or the hospital visit survived, but for the ease. The simplicity of love that didn't require silence or obedience. Odette. I turned back to the tray. 4 cannoli left. The sugar had begun to melt slightly in the heat, forming a fine glaze. Some days, the past is a whisper. Other days, it's a weight. But today, it was something in between, a presence that doesn't speak, but lingers, like smoke after the match has gone out. The market grew louder as the sun climbed above the terracotta rooftops. Vendors lifted their voices like songbirds trying to out-sing one another. Bargaining began in full force, fruit sellers offering cherries by the kilo, the fishmonger shouting about the freshness of his sardines. Familiar chaos. Comforting, in a way. I turned the cannoli tray to face the walkway and swept some stray sugar onto the parchment beneath. Then I stepped back, brushing the flour from my apron out of habit. The stall was quiet for a moment, a lull in the rhythm. That's when my hands found the edge of the counter and held on. Because I knew where memory would take me next. It's strange how your body knows before your mind catches up. It was my 8th birthday. The cake had been made by my mother, a simple sponge with a dusting of cocoa and a row of melted candle stubs she reused each year. I remember the scent of oranges in the batter, and the faint waxy smell from the candles. I blew them out with a whisper of hope I didn't dare say aloud. I never told anyone what I wished for. The celebration was small. My mother had set out 3 plates, her best linen napkins and a small bouquet of basil in a chipped vase. My brother had given me a rock he'd painted gold with tempera. "It's for luck," he'd said. That night, after the candles had burned down and Giuseppe had been tucked into bed, my father called for me. "Maria," he said, too softly. "Here a moment. I have something for you." I hesitated. My mother stood at the sink, scrubbing the same pot over and over. She didn't look up. I padded across the floor barefoot, the tiles cold even in July. His study door was slightly ajar. He never left it open unless he was waiting. I pushed it gently. It groaned. The room was dim, lit only by the desk lamp with the green glass shade. Shadows played against the walls, elongated, unnatural. My father sat behind the desk, a glass of grappa in one hand, the other resting on a stack of envelopes and newspaper clippings. There was a small box beside him. Wrapped. He smiled without showing teeth. "Close the door, Philia." I obeyed. The click of the door behind me felt louder than it should have. Final, almost. "Come here." I stepped forward, my eyes on the floor. He tapped the box, "Open it." Inside was a comb ornate, carved with tiny roses. The kind you might find at a market stall. Too pretty to be practical. I turned it over in my hands, unsure. "It's beautiful," I said, because I knew that's what he wanted to hear. "Try it," he said. "Take your hair down." My braid unraveled slowly. My hands trembled, and I dropped the comb. It hit the floor with a small, sharp sound. He didn't get angry. That was the worst part. He picked it up, placed it back in my hands. "You're becoming a woman," he said. "And a woman should know what it means to be wanted." That sentence has lived in my bones ever since. I didn't understand it then, not fully. But I felt the air change. I felt my heart stumble. "I'm cold," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. He stood and walked around the desk. "You won't be for long." What followed cannot be told like a story. It has no narrative arc, no proper shape. It lives outside of words. A shattering. A dissolving. I remember the sting of grappa on his breath, the sound of fabric tearing, the sharp edge of the desk pressing into my side. I remember saying no in the smallest voice I had. And I remember that it didn't matter. There are places your mind goes to survive things like that. Places where the wallpaper peels into clouds and your body stops being yours. I went there. When it was over, he told me to wash up and go to bed. "If you say anything, you'll break your mother's heart," he said. I wanted to scream that she'd already heard it breaking, but I didn't say a word. That night, I stared at the ceiling until the plaster patterns blurred. The comb lay on my bedside table. I refused to touch it again. I told myself it had been a mistake, a one-time thing, a bad dream. But I already knew I was lying. A customer called out, pulling me back to the present. "Signora Maria, do you have any of those almond tarts today?" I nodded, retrieved a fresh tray from beneath the counter, and began placing them into a paper box. "I saved you the last 3, I said. He winked. "You're a saint." I smiled. "A faint one." The market continued around me, normal, safe, full of everyday goodness. And yet, I had just returned from a place few ever survive with their souls intact. People think trauma announces itself with blood or bruises, but often it leaves quieter marks, the kind that hide behind smiles, that disguise themselves as discipline, or perfectionism or pride. After that night, I became a shadow of myself. I obeyed more, laughed less. I stopped asking questions and started watching for signs. When he'd drink, when he'd lose money, when he'd call my name too gently. I learned to hear danger in silence. And my mother, she never asked why I flinched when I passed him. In the hallway, she just washed the same pot over and over again. The hardest part was pretending that nothing had changed. That morning, the sun rose like it always did, pouring light over the tiles of the kitchen floor. My mother hummed softly while she chopped parsley, and the aroma of garlic sizzling in oil filled the air. Giuseppe sat at the table eating toast, his legs swinging beneath the chair. Nothing was different except me. I felt split open, but no one noticed the fracture. I stared at my plate, dry bread going stale by the second. My stomach twisted at the smell of food. My throat closed every time I tried to speak. When I looked at my mother, I waited for her eyes to catch mine, for her to pause, to say, "Something's wrong." But she didn't. She passed me a jar of jam, her face calm. "Eat, Maria, we've got to get moving. Your father's shift starts early today." He entered the room moments later, his footsteps slow but deliberate. I flinched before I could stop myself. He poured himself a coffee without speaking, stirred it with his finger, then leaned against the doorframe. His eyes found me like they always did, calculated, unbothered. "Maria was very good last night," he said casually, sipping from his mug. The jam jar in my hand slipped and nearly hit the floor. I caught it just in time, but my heart was already racing. My mother smiled vaguely. "She's always been our good girl." He nodded, looking satisfied. Then he ruffled my hair on his way out. The moment he left, my hands began to tremble. I clenched them into fists beneath the table. Why didn't she say anything? Why didn't she notice? Or maybe she did. Maybe she had long ago trained herself not to see what she didn't want to understand. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, legs dangling, the comb still lying untouched on the knitstand. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It felt like it would be admitting something, marking it as real. Instead, I stared at it, willing it to vanish. I didn't sleep. Every sound from the hallway set my body on edge of the creak of floorboards. The rustle of fabric, the faint cough that always came before he cleared his throat. But he didn't come that night. Or the next. And by the third day, I convinced myself maybe he wouldn't again. I was wrong. The next time was worse. There were no gifts, no quiet voice. Only the knock. 3 times. Always 3. I remember standing in front of the door, frozen. My mother passed me in the hallway without a glance. "He's waiting," she said, adjusting her apron. "Don't make him upset." And that was the moment, more than the bruises, more than the fear, that carved the deepest wound. She knew. She had known. I wasn't alone in my pain. I was alone in my defense. From then on, I stopped hoping for rescue. I told myself it was safer not to cry, not to ask for help. I folded my feelings like linens and stored them away, only bringing them out when I could wash them clean in my own time. At school, I said nothing. I sat still, turned in homework, kept my shoes polished and my mouth shut. But my teacher noticed. She always had. Professor Lucia Benedetti. She was the only adult whose voice didn't make me flinch. She had a soft cadence, the kind that wrapped around a room rather than slicing through it. One afternoon, she pulled me aside after the bell. "Maria, stay a moment, please." I stopped in the doorway, frozen. She sat at her desk, not facing me. Instead, she busied herself arranging papers. "I saw your drawing yesterday. The one with the girl in the locked tower." I said nothing. "I used to draw like that too," she continued. "When I was your age." That caught me off guard. She turned to face me slowly, her eyes gentle, never pushing, There are things we don't have words for, Maria. But your drawings. Speak loudly. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. She slid a folded piece of paper across the desk. My address. If you ever need help. For any reason. I stared at it. Then at her. I'm not saying you need to use it, she said. But sometimes, knowing someone sees you, that can change things. I took the paper and tucked it into my shoe. That night, when the knock came again, I pressed my heels tightly together and thought of that paper. Of her eyes, her voice. I didn't have the courage to run yet. But I had a seed, a name, a place, to go when the pain became too much. The next morning, I walked to school with my shoulders straighter. No one noticed, except her. She gave me a nod, just the smallest one. A sign. I wasn't invisible, and that was the beginning, not of healing. Not yet. But of awareness. The tiniest spark that one day, this wouldn't be all there was. That life might contain more than shadows and silence. There's a rhythm to survival. You learn the steps even if you never wanted to dance. I was 9 when the house became a stage I could no longer exit. The script was always the same. Dinner, dishes, footsteps in the hallway, the knock. 3 times. And then silence. It stopped. Being shocking. That was the part that terrified me most. He no longer brought gifts or spoke softly. He didn't bother pretending anymore. Some nights it happened in the study, others in the shed behind the house. Once, in the cellar where the air was damp and the light bulb flickered like a warning. He called it discipline. He called it love. He said I owed him for the roof over my head. My mother handed me to him with the same expression she used to hand him his coat. Detached. Efficient. One night, when he was drinking and laughing too loudly, she placed her hand on my back and pushed me gently toward the study. He's in a good mood. Don't ruin it. She didn't hate me. I don't think she loved me either. What she felt was something worse, indifference disguised as duty. By that point, I had stopped crying. Tears made no difference. I found comfort in repetition, folding my socks the same way, brushing my hair exactly 50 strokes, whispering the Hail Mary under my breath until the words felt like stone rosaries rolling across my tongue. One night, I did something small. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. I didn't knock. He always wanted me to knock before entering, to acknowledge his authority. That night, I opened the study door without a sound and walked in like a ghost. He looked up, startled. For a brief moment, he seemed smaller than usual. That was when I realized something. He needed my fear to feel powerful. So I started withdrawing it. Not all at once, but slowly. I refused to meet his eyes. I stopped flinching. I stared at the ceiling instead of the floor. I let my body be still, not tense. It was the only rebellion I could afford. And he noticed. You're getting colder, he said one night, breathing heavily against the hush of the room. I didn't answer. Do you think you're better than me now? You're just a child. I feed you. I clothe you. Still, I said nothing. You'll have nothing when I'm through with you. But I'd already lost everything that mattered. His threats rang hollow. Afterward, I crawled back to bed and counted the cracks in the ceiling. Until sleep claimed me. I began collecting scraps of power. Lucia's address hidden in the lining of my school shoes. A pencil stub I used to scribble secret thoughts into the margins of my notebooks. Words I couldn't say aloud took form in crooked letters. He is not God. Mama sees and still does nothing. I am not what he says. At school, I faded into background noise. But Lucia watched. She noticed everything. One afternoon, she placed a small notebook into my desk. For writing, she said quietly. Only for you. You don't have to show it to anyone. I clutched it like treasure. That night I wrote 5 words. One day I will leave. It was a promise, not a prayer. Around that time, my father's mood began shifting. He lost a bet. That cost more than he could afford. I heard him yelling through the walls about someone named Marco, about debts and shame. He threw a plate against the wall. My mother cleaned the shards silently, as if it were nothing new. Then things got worse. He started locking the windows. You're getting too curious, he said. You think you're clever. He installed bars in the cellar windows, changed the locks on the back door, installed new latches on the bathroom. The house became a fortress. Not to keep others out, but to keep me in. I became a prisoner of someone else's failure. One Sunday morning, after church, I asked my mother why we never invited people over. Other families hosted neighbors, shared wine in their gardens, played cards on the weekends. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, because people ask questions, and questions are dangerous. She set a bowl of peeled apples in front of me and returned to her ironing board. Her hands moved expertly over the fabric, steam rising like fog. I wanted to scream, to shatter the silence with something louder than pain. But I didn't. Instead, I wrote again that night. Even a bird in a cage still remembers how to fly. It wasn't poetry, but it was mine. Then came the broom. We called it La Scopa, and it had always hung by the kitchen door. It was used for sweeping, nothing more, until it WSN single quotes T.1 evening, after I came home late from school on purpose. He greeted me with La Scopa in his hand. My mother stood behind him, arms crossed. Children who forget rules must remember them the hard way, he said. The blows rained down without warning. I covered my head, tried not to scream. The sound of wood against bone is not something you forget. When it was over, I lay on the floor, tasting blood. And then I saw her. My mother stood in the doorway, not blinking. Her lips were curled slightly upward, not in a smile, but something close to satisfaction. She needed to learn, she told him. And in that instant, the final illusion broke. She wasn't a silent victim. She was a participant. I dragged myself to my room and locked the door. My body ached, but my mind was clear. They would not win. I had seen their cruelty, and I had survived it. And someday, I would speak it aloud. Not now, not yet, but one day, and the world would listen. The first time I packed a bag, it wasn't because I believed I could get away. It was because I had to try. There's a difference. I was 10. The night before, he had taken La Scopa to my legs until the bruises looked like shadows of branches twisting up my skin. My mother didn't blink when she passed me in the hallway. She handed me a cold compress and said, "Don't limp at school. It makes people ask questions." So I walked straight. But I did not forget. The idea had been growing inside me like a secret root. I hadn't told anyone, not even Giuseppe, who had started looking at me with the same caution one gives a lit match. I waited until the house was still. My father's snores buzzed like a distant engine through the floorboards. I slipped out of bed, barefoot, my nightgown, fluttering like it knew this might be the last time I wore it. I moved quietly. The bag I chose was small, more of a sack than anything. I placed inside it a change of clothes, the comb he had given me. I still don't know why I brought it, the notebook Lucia had given me, and her address, now worn soft in the creases from living inside my shoe. I added a slice of bread wrapped in a napkin and my rosary more from habit than faith. I reached the back door. Locked. He had installed a bolt high above my reach. I hadn't thought of that. I moved to the kitchen window. The latches were new, heavy, thick, meant to keep the Cold out in winter, or keep me in. My heart began to race. I tried the cellar entrance. Another lock. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, holding the bag, staring at a world I could see but not enter. And then I heard it. His voice. Where do you think you're going, little bird? He stepped out from the shadows near the stairs. Barefoot, shirt half buttoned, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers. The light from the hallway caught the edge of his face, unshaven, slouched and unbothered. I clutched the bag tighter. Out, I whispered. Just outside. For air. He took a step closer. With your things packed? I didn't answer. He laughed. A low, humorless sound. Do you know what happens to little girls who run away? He asked. I backed against the kitchen table. No one wants a broken thing, he said. Especially one that's already been used. The blow came. Fast, not the broom this time. Just his hand open, sharp, practiced. I stumbled, caught the edge of the chair, and fell to the floor. The bag spilled open. The comb landed beside me, its teeth broken on one side. He picked it up. Ungrateful, he said. I gave you everything. Then he turned and walked away. I lay there, watching the shadow of the hallway stretch into morning. When the sun finally rose, I was still on the floor. My mother stepped over me to make coffee. She didn't ask what happened. She never did. 2 days later, at school, Lucia touched my arm gently and asked if I wanted to stay behind after class. I told her I had chores. She nodded, but her eyes didn't believe me. That evening, I made a second plan. This one smarter. I had overheard my father complaining about the roof tiles needing repair. One of them near the attic window had come loose. That night, I snuck up the stairs after everyone had gone to sleep. The attic smelled of mothballs and old books, but I didn't care. I climbed onto the chest beneath the window, pushed it open. Slowly, and peeked out. The city stretched beneath me, silent, drowsy, breathing in the summer heat. I felt the wind for the first time in weeks. It almost made me cry. I pulled myself through the gap and onto the roof. The tiles shifted under my weight, and I had to move slowly. I crouched low, inching along, feeling the rough clay scrape my knees. I didn't care. Halfway across, I heard his voice. Go on, he said from below. Jump. I'll tell them you were always sick, that you heard voices, that you fell. I froze. He stood in the courtyard, arms crossed, waiting. You think anyone would believe you? He called. A little liar like you. I sat there, perched, on the roof, unable to move. I could see the convent bell tower from there. I could even make out the road that led to Lucia's neighborhood. So close. But the weight of his words pinned me to the tiles like nails. I climbed back inside. That night, he didn't touch me. He didn't need to. He had won by saying nothing. At all. But I wrote again. This time, it filled 3 pages. Not a diary entry. A plan. I wrote what I needed to survive. Times he left. Patterns I noticed. Who he owed money to. Where he hid his betting slips. I listed everything. Dates, places, even quotes. I didn't know then what I would use it for. But I knew someday I would. And when I did, it would all matter. There were days I didn't speak at all. Not out of defiance. Silence became safer. It formed around me like gauze, soft, numbing, slightly suffocating. If I was quiet enough, still enough, sometimes he forgot I was there. Or at least he didn't look at me in that way. And that, in those days, was mercy. But Lucia never let me disappear entirely. She'd never confront me in front of the others. That wasn't her way. Instead, she created pauses, gentle spaces I could fill if I chose. During recess, while the others ran barefoot through the grass behind the school, she would sit on the stone bench by the fig tree and let her book rest closed in her lap. Sometimes I'd sit beside her. Other times I only watched from a distance. Once, I caught her looking at the bruises on my wrists. I had pulled my sleeves down quickly, but she said nothing. Her silence didn't feel like neglect. It felt like invitation. The day that changed everything wasn't loud or dramatic. It started with the normal lesson fractions drawn on the board, chalk dust rising like mist in the sunlight. But that afternoon, as we lined up for dismissal, she touched my shoulder lightly and said, "Stay back a moment, Maria." I froze. The other children whispered as they filed out. She didn't move until the room was empty. Then she turned to face me. "I want you to know something," she said. "When I was your age, I thought no one saw me either. I stared at the floor. My heartbeat was in my throat. My uncle used to hurt me," she continued. "He said it was love. He said I was special." My eyes flicked up. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. I was afraid. I thought I'd be blamed or sent away. But one day, someone believed me. She stepped closer, not touching me, just waiting. "I don't need you to say anything, Maria. But if something's happening at home, I can help." The word help sounded strange. Almost fictional. I hadn't heard it in a long time. My voice cracked. "I can't." She nodded. "That's okay. You don't have to yet." She pulled out a wrapped package from her bag, small, brown paper tied with string. "I made these," she said. "Cinnamon biscuits. My grandmother's recipe. I thought you might like them." I took the parcel with both hands. It was warm. I hadn't held something warm given in kindness in what felt like years. "Thank you." That night, I hid the biscuits under my bed. I didn't eat them, not right away. I just opened the wrapping slightly and let the scent surround me. Cinnamon and clove and something else, something like memory or safety. The next morning, I left the house early and waited outside the school gate. I told Lucia I'd help clean the erasers. It wasn't true. I just didn't want to go home. She handed me a damp cloth and let me dust the chalkboards while she organized papers. No questions. No probing. Just presents. Later that week, she gave me a blank envelope. "If you ever want to write something, anything, you can put it in here," she said. "I won't read it unless you ask me to." That night, I wrote 3 lines and sealed it shut. "I am scared all the time. My mother knows but doesn't stop him. I don't want to be alive if this never ends." I didn't give her the letter the next day. I carried it in my pocket for a week, the corners softening, the ink blurring from where my fingers touched it too many times. Finally, after school, I left it on her desk when she wasn't looking. I didn't wait to see her read it. I ran all the way home. That weekend something shifted. My father had lost money again. I heard him cursing, throwing things. My mother stayed silent, which was worse than her speaking. When he came for me, he wasn't careful. On Monday morning, Lucia saw the bruises on my face. She didn't say a word, just placed a hand gently on my shoulder and squeezed. That was the first time I cried in front of anyone. The tears came fast. Too fast. I gasped, tried to swallow them down, but they wouldn't stop. I curled into myself, afraid I was breaking apart in front of someone I couldn't afford to lose. She didn't say, she didn't tell me to be strong. She just pulled me into her arms and let me cry. And that was more healing than anything else. Later that afternoon, when the classroom was empty again, she handed me another piece of paper. "This is the Name of someone I trust, she said. A woman who works with girls like you. She won't tell anyone without your permission. But she will believe you. I stared at the name. I didn't take it yet. I'm not ready, I said. That's okay, she replied. But you're not alone anymore, Maria. Not ever again. For weeks, I carried the name Lucia had given me folded in my notebook, tucked between multiplication tables and spelling exercises. The paper wasn't large, just a narrow strip torn from her own notes, but it felt heavier than anything I owned. As if it were made of iron. The name was Carla Bianchi. Beneath it, a phone number. That was all. No address. No title. Just ink. And possibility. Each time I opened the notebook to do my homework, the paper peeked out. I would read it again and again, as if memorizing the name would summon courage. But courage didn't come the way stories said it would. There was no swelling, music, no flash of defiance. Just a slow ache in my chest, and 1,000 whispered what-ifs. What if she didn't believe me? What if she did and nothing changed? What if my father found out? I tore up the paper twice, then rewrote it from memory both times. By that point, I had begun testing the edge of truth. Not with everyone, only with Lucia. I would say things like, sometimes I don't like going home, or my mother isn't like the ones in stories. She always listened, never pushed. Your words matter, she told me once, when I tried to brush something off. Even when they scare you. I wanted to believe that, but my life was built on unspeakable things. And then one morning, something small broke. It was raining. A steady drizzle, the kind that turns everything into fog. The market was closed that day, and the streets were quiet. At school, Lucia had pulled me aside before class and placed a sealed envelope in my hands. I know you're not ready yet, she said, but if the time comes, give this to Carla. It explains everything. I nodded. Lips pressed tight. At lunch, I kept the envelope inside my coat pocket. I sat near the window, watching the rain gather in puddles, my sandwich untouched. Giuseppe walked past with his friends. He didn't look at me. That was fine. He had learned to survive by looking away. By the time I got home, the house smelled of damp towels and something burnt. My mother was in the kitchen, scraping a pan. My father was in the living room, yelling at the radio. He was pacing. That meant danger. He'd lost again. I could tell by the way he muttered names, cursed under his breath, kicked the leg of the table when the announcer read out the scores. I swear they fixed these games, he said. All rigged, every last one. I stood in the doorway, soaked and silent. When he turned and saw me, something shifted. Not his expression, his posture. His eyes darkened and I braced. Come here, he said, voice calm. That calmness scared me more than shouting. My mother kept her back to us. I shook my head. His mouth twitched. Excuse me? I have homework. You can do that later. I didn't move. He stepped forward. And that's when my mother finally spoke. She's wet, she said, still not turning. Let her change first. It was the first time she'd said anything resembling a defense. But it was too little and far too late. He grunted, waved his hand. Fine. 5 minutes. I bolted up the stairs and shut my door. I'd pressed my back against it and pulled the envelope from my coat. It was damp at the edges, but still intact. I stared at it. Then I did something I'd never done before. I wrote my own letter. Just 3 sentences. Name is Maria. I am not safe in my home. Please help me before it's too late. I signed it with shaking fingers, folded it into a fresh envelope, and placed both letters, the one Lucia wrote and my own, into my school bag. That night, I couldn't sleep. I didn't even try. I stayed awake listening for creaks, for the shifting weight of steps, for the sound of the handle turning. But he didn't come. The next morning, the sky had cleared. Everything was brighter than it should have been, too sharp around the edges. I walked to school alone, hands clenched around the strap of my bag. I told myself today would be the day. At the last second, I didn't give the letter to Lucia. I kept it, because I wanted to be the one to decide when the truth left my hands. After school, I waited until dusk. I walked 3 blocks past my usual stop and stood in front of a pale green building with flower boxes in the windows. A small bronze plaque beside the door read, Fondazione Carla Bianchi, Protezione Min. ORI. My heart pounded. I stepped forward. Then I stopped. I stood there for 20 minutes. And then I walked away, not because I didn't want help, but because I wanted to choose the moment. The next day, I gave the envelope to Lucia. I'm not ready to talk, I said. But I'm ready for her to know. Lucia nodded, eyes glassy. You just did talk, Maria. I was 11 the day I snapped. Not with screams. Not with shouts or fists. It wasn't a loud rebellion. It happened in the quietest hour of the afternoon, when the house was half asleep with heat and stillness. My father had gone to lie down. My mother had just finished polishing the floor. The windows were open, letting in the smell of distant lavender fields and a faint breeze that couldn't cool the weight inside that house. I was in the kitchen, wiping the counter out of habit, not necessity. The broom hung beside the back door. La Scopa. It looked ordinary to anyone else, but to me, it was a symbol of every time I'd been struck into silence. Its handle had left marks across my back, my thighs, the softest parts of me he believed no one would ever see. I stood in front of it for a long time. My hands had stopped moving. And then I took it down. I didn't plan to. I just reached for it, slow and deliberate, as if I were reaching for an answer. I carried it to the center of the kitchen and held it horizontally across my thighs. It was heavier than I remembered. My heart pounded as I gripped it at both ends and pressed it against my knee. It didn't snap. Not right away. So I pushed harder, teeth clenched, breath shallow. I didn't care if I cut myself on the splinters. I didn't care if he heard. I wanted it broken. I needed it broken. The first crack came like a whisper. I gasped almost in disbelief. But then I kept going, leaning my full weight against it until it finally split in two, the bristles scattering across the tile like fallen straw. For 1 second, I felt powerful. Not free, not safe, but no longer passive. Then I heard his voice. What do you think you're doing? He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, shirtless, his hair flattened from sleep, his eyes locked onto the pieces on the floor. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My pulse roared in my ears. He stepped forward, picked up the broken handle, and stared at it in his hand. You think this means something? He said. You think this makes you strong? I took a step back. It's just a broom, he said. I'll get another. I'll get 10. My mother appeared behind him, silent as always, her face unreadable. She looked down at the broken wood, then at me. She's been getting bold, she said. I couldn't breathe. That night, the beating was worse than any before. He didn't use the broom, he used his fists. When I fell to the ground, I saw her, watching, not in horror, not in confusion, but with a sick sort of calm. And that broke me more than the pain. She had always known. I'd whispered that to myself for years. But now, I saw it. She had known, and she had allowed it. She had listened to the knocks, to the cries, to the silence, and she had gone on peeling potatoes, washing sheets, humming. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't lie on my back. My ribs throbbed, and one eye had swollen nearly shut. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was done hoping she would save me. I would save myself. In the morning, I left early for school, moving slowly, one hand pressed to my side. Lucia saw me the moment I entered. "Maria," she whispered. "Come with me." She took me to the staff room and closed the door. "Did he do this?" she asked, her voice low, urgent. I nodded. "Your mother?" She watched. Lucia inhaled. Sharply. Then, slowly, she sat down beside me. "Maria, I need you to be very brave. Just once more. I'm going to help you. But I need your words. All of them." And I gave them. Everything. The study. The comb. La scopa. The roof. The cellar. The threats. The things I didn't even have words for. I told her what it was like to wake up afraid every morning, to flinch at the sound of keys, to watch your mother become a stranger. I spoke until my throat burned. Lucia didn't interrupt. She only placed her hand gently over mine and waited until I was finished. When I finally looked up, her eyes were wet. "I believe you," she said. And those 3 words split something inside me that had held too long. Not because I doubted them, but because I had never heard them before. "I'm going to take this to someone I trust," she said. "A social worker. Her name is Carla. She's been waiting to help you." I nodded. "And scared," I admitted. "I know," she said. "But you're not alone anymore. That's the difference. There are some moments that split your life in two. Before and after. The morning I walked through Lucia's door with blood dried at the corner of my mouth, my life changed. The sky had just begun to brighten, pale and grey. The streets were still, wet from the night's rain. I hadn't slept. I hadn't even gone home after school the day before. I wandered the alleys until the lamps flickered off, and the scent of espresso drifted through the cracks in doorways. Lucia answered her door in a wool cardigan, her hair loose around her shoulders. She didn't ask questions. She stepped aside and let me in. Her home smelled like soap and rosemary and old books. There were blankets folded neatly on the sofa, a half-written letter on the kitchen table, and the soft sound of a kettle beginning to boil. I stood there. She guided me to the bathroom without a word, handed me a towel and a bar of lavender soap. When I came out, clean but still shaking, she had made tea. Chamomile with honey. She placed the cup in front of me and sat opposite, her hands folded. "I'm here," she said. "That's all you need to know." And so I spoke. For 2 hours, maybe more. I told her everything. The first time in the study. The comb. The knock on the door that became routine. My mother's silences. My brother's distance. The failed escapes. The night on the roof. La scopa. I told her how my body had become something I floated above. How I had learned to feel nothing to survive everything. She didn't cry, but her lips pressed into a tight line. Her knuckles whitened as she listened. When I had no more to say, I reached into my coat and handed her the envelope, the one I had written with my own words. She opened it and read in silence. When she looked up, her voice trembled. "Maria," she whispered, "do you know how brave you are?" I shook my head. "You are." She stood and went to the kitchen. When she returned, she held a small folder, thin, worn, full of notes. "I've been watching," she said. "Not in a way that invades, but in a way that prepares. I wrote down every time you flinched, every injury you tried to hide, every absence that didn't make sense." She laid the folder on the table. "You're not alone in this," she told me about Carla, the social worker I had feared and longed for. About the officer who worked quietly with cases like mine. She explained the process, how things might unfold, what risks there were, how carefully we needed to move. And then she asked, "Are you ready?" I didn't hesitate. Yes, because I knew if I waited any longer, I might never do it. Lucia placed a gentle hand on mine. "Then we begin now." She made the first call. I sat beside her on the couch, the teacup still in my hand. She spoke with clarity, precision. She told Carla about the evidence, about the letter, about me. Carla arrived the next morning. She wore a soft green scarf and smelled like peppermint. She knelt beside me, not above me, and looked me in the eye. "You are not what they did to you," she said. "You are what you decide to become." I didn't know what that was yet, but I wanted to find out. Carla explained that we would gather everything: my letter, Lucia's notes, photos of the bruises Lucia had discreetly taken after the last incident. She said my voice was powerful, but evidence would make it undeniable. I asked one question: "Will I have to go back?" She shook her head. "Not after this. We made a plan. One final meeting, one final night, one final recording if I could bear it. We'll place a microphone in your necklace," Carla explained. "The kind that looks like a pendant. If he speaks, if he threatens, if he confesses, we'll have what we need." Lucia looked at me. "You don't have to." "I want to," I said, "if it means no other girl ends up like me." That afternoon, they gave me the pendant. I wore it beneath my collar, over the bruises still fading, and I went home. I walked up the path to our yellow house just after sunset. The sky behind me was streaked in violet and grey, the colour of bruises that haven't yet healed. The pendant felt heavy around my neck. I knew it wasn't. The device was no larger than a coin, tucked neatly into the locket Lucia had once given me, a gift I never wore until now. I could hear my heart in my ears as I stepped up to the door. My palms were damp. I wiped them against my skirt before reaching for the handle. Inside, the house was dim. The only light came from the small lamp in the corner of the living room. My mother sat at the table, her back to me, peeling potatoes. With slow, mechanical movements. She didn't turn. "He's in the study," she said. No greeting. No question. Just a fact. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary. When I didn't move, she finally glanced up. "What are you waiting for?" I swallowed. "Nothing." I crossed the hallway. Footsteps light. My fingers brushed against the wall as I passed. The wallpaper there had always curled slightly in the corner. I used to hide notes behind it, little drawings, secret prayers. I wondered if they were still there, faded and folded. The door to the study was ajar. I didn't knock this time. He was sitting at his desk, the same as always, glass of grappa in hand, his sleeves rolled up, a racing slip beside his elbow. He looked up and smirked. "Well," he said, "about time." I stepped inside, shut the door behind me. My fingers grazed the pendant at my neck. Just enough to steady myself, just enough to remember what this was. He didn't waste time. "You've been sulking, avoiding me," he sipped. "You think I don't notice?" I said nothing. "You're getting older," he said, eyes narrowing. "That means you cost more. Food, clothes, electricity." He stood and walked slowly around the desk. "You think I do this because I like it?" I kept my face blank. "I do it because someone has to teach you how to behave. Because no one else will." He was close now. His breath smelled of alcohol and sour meat. "You owe me," he hissed. For every bite you've ever eaten. 4. Every day under this roof. He reached for my wrist, and I said calmly, evenly, "Is that why you sold me?" He froze. "What did you say?" I met his gaze. "You told Marco I'd pay your debt." His mouth twitched. "You little. Did you really think I didn't hear you?" I continued. "That I didn't know what you were planning?" He grabbed my arm hard. "You think you're smart now? You think you've got power?" The words spilled from him, then full of rage and confession. "I could have gotten 500 for you. More if you'd shut your mouth. You should be grateful I let you stay here this long. You should be kissing the ground I walk on." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would rupture the mic. "Say it again," I said. "Tell me what I'm worth." He laughed, cruel and loud. "You? You were bought and paid for the day you were born." That's when I turned and opened the door. Carla stepped into the hallway first, then the officer behind her. Lucia stood just beyond the threshold, not speaking, just watching. My father blinked. "What is this?" He spat. "You called the police?" He charged toward me, but the officer stepped between us. "Roberto Mancini," he said, voice firm. "You're under arrest for child endangerment, sexual assault of a minor, and conspiracy to commit trafficking." My father laughed again, as if disbelief could protect him. Then he saw the locket. The color drained from his face. "You recorded me." I didn't answer. He thrashed as they cuffed him, shouting every curse he could summon. He yelled at my mother, demanded she say something. But she didn't. She stood in the kitchen doorway, still holding the peeler. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were blank as they led him out. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn away. I watched until the door closed behind them. My mother didn't speak. I stepped toward her. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," I said. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. And then I walked out. Not quietly, not hidden, not as a shadow. I walked out as someone who had survived. The house was behind me. The walls that had witnessed my breaking, silent witnesses made of plaster and lies, had finally released me. And yet, as I walked with Lucia that evening, I felt the weight of it still pressing down my back like a ghost trying to follow. Lucia didn't ask me questions. She didn't fill the silence. She walked beside me, her shoulder steady beside mine, as if the mere act of not letting me fall was enough. We arrived at a building I didn't recognize. Pale blue shutters, clay pots of rosemary lining the balcony, the faint hum of wind chimes above the door. A modest home tucked within a quiet street, the kind that felt too gentle for what I carried in my chest. "This is the place, Lucia," said softly. Carla was already waiting on the steps, her scarf fluttering like a flag of welcome. "You'll be staying here for now," she said, "with Julia and Matteo. They're kind. They've helped many girls before. You'll have your own room, your own key. No one enters without your permission." I flinched at that "your own key," because I'd never had one. Never locked, door to keep others out, only to keep myself in. Julia was tall, with streaks of silver in her dark braid and warm eyes that didn't search. She simply held out her hand and said, "You're safe now." I didn't know how to answer. Matteo had kind hands. That's what I noticed first. He didn't try to touch me, just smiled and carried my small bag inside. Inside, the air was filled with cinnamon and wood polish. A cat slept on a chair by the window. There were photographs on the walls, not staged portraits, but candid moments. Laughter mid-bite, hands kneading dough, a child holding a sparrow. My room was upstairs. Simple. A twin bed, a desk with a lamp, a wardrobe that didn't creak. The window overlooked a fig tree, and the floor was worn smooth from years of footsteps. None of them mine. Giuli. Air handed me a fresh towel, a bar of lemon soap, and a nightgown folded neatly in her arms. If you need anything, she said, just knock on our door. Or don't knock. Come as you are. I sat on the bed for a long time after she left. I didn't unpack. I just stared at the key in my palm. It was brass. Cool. Small enough to lose, yet heavy in meaning. I slipped it beneath my pillow. That night, I didn't sleep right away. The silence was unfamiliar, not hollow like at home, but full. Full of breath, distant laughter from Julia's radio, the rustle of pages turning in some other room. And still, I lay stiff, waiting for footsteps. That never came. For a knock that didn't follow. At one point, the cat wandered into my room, circled once, and leapt onto the bed. It didn't ask for permission. It just curled into the crook of my knees, warm and sure. I cried then, quietly, into the pillow. Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't. It was the first time I'd ever cried in a room that didn't hold shame. The following week passed in rhythms I didn't expect. Breakfasts were shared around the table. Toast and jam, soft-boiled eggs, coffee that Julia insisted I could try, even if it made me wrinkle my nose. I met other girls, some older, some younger. We didn't trade stories. We didn't have to. A glance was often enough. A nod across the garden. A shared smile over a too-sweet cup of tea. We spoke a language made of survival. Lucia visited twice. She brought me a book of poetry and a new notebook. I hadn't written since the night I gave her my confession. But I kept the notebook near, as if just owning it gave me permission to begin again. One afternoon, Carla returned. With news. Your father's trial is scheduled, she said. 3 weeks from today. I nodded. And your mother, she's under investigation for child endangerment. She may face charges. That struck me more deeply than I expected. I had told myself I didn't care anymore. That she had become a fixture of the house, nothing more. But there had been a time when I watched her hands knead dough, braid my hair, kiss my forehead. I don't want to see her, I said quietly. You won't have to unless you choose to, Carla assured me. This is your story now. You get to decide how it's told. Later that day, I sat beneath the fig tree, the notebook open on my knees. The page was blank, but I wasn't afraid of it. I didn't write the past. I wrote the future. Not a long one. Not yet. Just a scene. A girl walking into a bakery, dusting her hands with flour, greeting customers, laughing without looking over her shoulder. It was enough. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a girl trying to escape. I felt like someone becoming. I never returned to the yellow house on Via della Speranza. Not even when they sold it. Not even when the papers arrived confirming my father's sentence and my mother's withdrawal from the proceedings. By then, I had already left that place in every way that mattered. Years passed as they do. I stayed with Julia and Matteo until I was 17. Long after the trial. Long after the headlines faded. I found work at a bakery 2 streets away from their home. At first, I cleaned trays and swept floors. Then I began folding dough, piping cream, learning the feel of yeast between my fingers. It was the first time my hands created something without fear. One morning, when I was 18, the owner asked me why I never smiled when I served customers. Told him I was still learning how. Eventually, I saved enough to rent a small apartment. A single window. A stove that clicked 3 times before it lit. I found peace in the quiet, in the rituals of baking before dawn, in the music of my own footsteps returning to a space that was mine and no one else. As Dot and I changed my name, not legally. Not in any formal way. But inside, I stopped answering to the girl who had once been locked behind wallpaper and shame. I chose Maria again, not as the child they bruised, but as the woman who survived them. Years later, long after Julia and Matteo had retired to the countryside, I opened my own stall in the market square of Mantova. It wasn't grand, just a weathered counter, an awning striped in sun-faded green, and a tray of pastries that always sold out before noon. I wore the same apron every day, the same cross pendant that once carried the recorder. And on my left hand, I kept the gold band, not as memory of love lost, but of promise made. The one I made to myself in that notebook beneath the fig tree. I will not be what they tried to turn me into. I kept that promise. The market children called me Nona Maria, though I had no children of my own. I didn't correct them. I liked how it sounded like a title earned. Sometimes they'd help me mix sugar or arrange biscuits. Sometimes they'd ask me if I had a husband, and I'd smile and say, "Once I thought I did." But in the end, I was the only one who stayed. They didn't understand. They didn't need to. One crisp morning, a girl about 8 or 9 came to the stall. She was quiet, a little pale, with nervous hands and a bruise half hidden beneath her sleeve. Her mother spoke too quickly and didn't make eye contact. After they left, the girl turned around just before disappearing into the crowd. Her eyes found mine. I knew those eyes. I didn't follow. I didn't ask. I simply placed a warm biscuit in a paper napkin and handed it to a boy who often helped me carry crates. "Give this to the girl in the red coat," I said. "Tell her it's from someone who knows." That evening, I sat alone behind the counter, brushing flour from my dress. The lantern above the stall flickered, casting my shadow across the cobblestones. I thought of Carla, of Lucia, of the first night I slept without fear, of the last night I ever heard my father's voice, of the broom I broke and the door I closed and never opened again. And I thought of the girl in the red coat. How many of us had there been? Too many, but fewer now, because one voice had spoken, because one girl had risked everything to be believed, because someone had waited in silence and someone else had listened. That night, I took the long way home, past the fig tree now grown wild against the stone wall, past the school where Lucia once stood beside me, past the door I once stood in front of but never knocked. I didn't stop. I walked on, the night air cool against my neck, the city breathing like it had always known how to hold me. Now, at 71, I still wake early. My joints ache more than they used to. My hands don't move as fast, but they remember. They always remember. I bake the same lemon cream cannoli. I dust them with sugar the way I used to whisper prayers. I've never written a book. I've never told my story to a room full of strangers. But I've told it where it mattered. To the girl in the red coat. To the boy with questions in his eyes. To myself. Every time I lace my apron and stand behind the counter without fear. This is what survival looks like. Not in headlines or trials, but in routines that don't hurt. In mornings that don't begin with dread. In hands that make things sweeter instead of smaller. And in the silence that now feels like peace, not punishment.